From Focal Point Radio and Radio Fairfax in Fairfax, Virginia, this is The Mimi Gerges Show. Qasim Rashid was born in Pakistan and immigrated to the United States with his family as a boy. He's Muslim, but he's the wrong kind of Muslim. Qasim prays, fasts, and reads the Quran just like any other Muslim, but he's an Ahmadiyya Muslim, and according to many Muslims around the world, and especially in his native Pakistan, he's not only not a Muslim, he's an apostate and should be killed. The Pakistani government openly persecutes or turns a blind eye to murders and rapes of not only Ahmadiyya Muslims, but also Christians, Hindus, Shia Muslims, atheists. Qasim Rashid says that Pakistan is choking on its bigotry and exporting it to the U.S. He's written about religious persecution in Pakistan and the very brave people standing against it. His book is called The Wrong Kind of Muslim, and he joins me in the studio. Qasim, welcome to the program.
Oh, great to be here, Mimi. Thank you for having me.
So Americans are just getting to understand the difference between Sunnis and Shias. What is an Ahmadiyya Muslim? What do they believe, and how is it different?
The Ahmadiyya Muslim community are Sunni Muslims, and we're generally differentiated as Muslims who believe in the Messiah, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian. We believe that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was that Messiah that was foretold by the Prophet Muhammad, by the Quran, by the Bible. So this dogmatic difference has ended up resulting in causing some vicious persecution against the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And that is really the singular difference.
So Qasim, let me clarify. I have the verse from the Quran. This is 61:6, and I'll just read it real quick. It says, "And remember, Jesus, the son of Mary, said, 'O children of Israel, I am the apostle of Allah sent to you, confirming the law which came before me, and giving glad tidings of a messenger to come after me, whose name shall be Ahmad.'" So this is the Quran saying this, that Jesus said it. So it's not actually in the Bible. Christians don't believe that Jesus says somebody is coming after him, but this is the verse in the Quran that a lot of this stems from, right?
Right. Well, so a lot of this comes down to dogmatic and spiritual interpretation. And, part of what I write in this book is we can agree to disagree on religion. And I want to emphasize that this is not a religious book. And it's a misnomer because you would think a book titled The Wrong Kind of Muslim is a religious book. But on the contrary, the whole point is we can have our Christian beliefs and Muslim beliefs and Shia beliefs and Ahmadi beliefs and Sunni beliefs, Hindus, atheists, agnostics. That's all secondary to this fundamental principle that as human beings we are equal and we must have universal freedom of conscience.
And that we can live in peace all together.
Exactly.
So just give us some context about how many Ahmadiyya Muslims are there in the world?
So worldwide, somewhere between 18 and 20 million. Census counts are more difficult in countries like Pakistan. In much of the Arab world, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is growing rapidly. There are countless Arab Ahmadiyya Muslims, but again, due to the persecution, it's difficult to have a census count simply because you identify yourself, suddenly you're arrested, you're persecuted, you're boycotted, you're murdered.
Largest concentration, though, is in Pakistan.
No, actually, the largest concentrations are equal in Pakistan as well as in several African countries. Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast. Pew recently did a survey that found that there were about 8 to 10 million Ahmadiyya Muslims in that area.
And it started about when?
The Ahmadiyya Muslim community was founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad in 1889 in a small village called Qadian, which is in now modern-day India. It was in India then as well. And since then, it has spread to over 200 nations worldwide. We run over 15,000 mosques. And in addition to that, we make a concerted effort on humanitarian service. So we run about 600 secular educational institutions, several dozen hospitals worldwide offering free medical care to anyone who needs it, regardless of background.
Your book opens with an attack on an Ahmadiyya mosque in Pakistan. What happened?
This was on October 7th, 2005, and this was really the motivation that made me realize this is a story that needs to be told. 3 terrorists walked into a mosque at morning prayer, Fajr prayer, and basically shot up and killed 8 Ahmadiyya Muslims, injuring over 20 more, and left without a single bit of resistance. The police were nowhere to be found. And when I visited this mosque a few weeks later and saw the blood-splattered walls and the bullet holes and the graves and the people still crying and weeping for their departed, I realized that not only is this a very personal story to me, but this is a direct reflection of the extremism growing in Pakistan and affecting international security. And the scariest part, though, was how few people were really aware of this danger and what people are doing to stop it from spreading.
Few people in Pakistan or in the United States?
Both. In Pakistan, the silent majority, unfortunately, is either in denial or completely unaware due to the persecutory and laws that censor any freedom of expression. And in the United States, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings of what is and is not going on in Pakistan. One thing I want to point out is this book is not just about what is going wrong in Pakistan or what is going wrong in the world. It's also about what is going right. And the subtitle of the book is An Untold Story of Persecution and Perseverance. And I can't emphasize that enough because there are millions of people fighting back against this extremism, turning the tide, but they can't do it alone. We need more people to join in.
But how can they fight against this? I mean, it's incredibly dangerous for anybody in a minority religion in Pakistan. So what do they do?
You're absolutely right. And this is where I think it's important to unite despite our religious differences. And that's the call that I make in this book, that whether we're Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Shia, this is all secondary to the fact that we're all equal human beings. And until and unless we recognize this and unite against this common enemy of extremism, of oppression of conscience, we're going to continue to suffer. And in the book, I list out several different ways. One is simply by spreading this message that this persecution and this oppression exists. Look, we can't cure a cancer unless we recognize that a cancer exists. Pew had a phenomenal survey a couple of years ago that showed that 5.25 billion people worldwide live under some kind of religious oppression. Billion, not million. Very few people are even aware of this. If you live in a world where...
So religious freedom is more the exception than the rule.
That's exactly what it is. My point is. And the fact that those who are living in a free mind are unaware of the fact that they're the exception, I think is the first problem. So we need to change that. Once we do that, then we can start having movements, grassroots movements, political movements, UN movements towards repealing discriminatory laws and stopping the extremism at its root rather than just trying to cover it up with aid and things like that.
Qasim Rashid is an attorney and author. He's in the studio with me. His book is called The Wrong Kind of Muslim, An Untold Story of Persecution and Perseverance. Pakistan was created in 1947. It was partitioned from India, and it was supposed to be a secular democracy. Something went horribly wrong.
It did. And when you look at the founding father, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, when you look at his statements, his declarations of what Pakistan was going to be, in fact, in a radio address to the United States, no less, he made very clear that Pakistan would not be a theocracy to be ruled by priests with a divine mission. That's an exact quote. And what we saw happen in Pakistan is you had a mixture of mosque and state. You had extremist clerics infiltrate the government, not by some creeping or some side standard, but head on, and the government folded. This is a very open, very public thing. There's nothing secret about it.
Why, though?
Oh, well, I think this is what happens when you have a government that has a lack of justice, a lack of accountability, a lack of decency to it. And it goes back to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, whose daughter, Benazir Bhutto, is highly admired, and I think rightfully so. But her father did a grave injustice. He allowed mosque and state to mix, and not a decade later, it allowed dictator Zia to come into power, who, by the way, was fully supported and funded by the U.S. government, to which we even admit today. And dictator Zia instituted laws like death for blasphemy, prison sentences for speaking out against the government or against a religion in a manner he didn't approve of.
And Ahmadiyya Muslims were declared non-Muslims. They were apostates.
Bhutto declared us non-Muslims. Zia took it one step further and said, if they insist on declaring themselves Muslims, throw them in prison. And if they blaspheme Prophet Muhammad, kill them. And I want to emphasize that, it's easy to blame Pakistan or Pakistanis for this. But Zia was someone, again, supported by our government, which is unfortunate because as the United States, as an attorney, as someone who loves our Constitution and upholds our laws, any number of international laws and domestic laws were broken with that and are still being broken with that.
What does blasphemy really mean in that sense?
In the sense of a normal person, it means whatever you want it to mean, right? Because it's such an amorphous and mushy word. It can be anything. Whatever is blasphemous to you might be sacred to me. In Pakistan, they've defined blasphemy as anything that offends the Sunni Muslim majority. And
it could be anything.
It could be anything. Right now, Asya Bibi, a Christian mother of 4, languishes in a putrid Pakistani prison because she was accused of blasphemy. Notwithstanding how ludicrous it is to send someone to prison for alleged blasphemy, there was no evidence given, there was no due process, there was no trial, but yet she sits in prison for this alleged claim of blasphemy, and there's zero, and I can't emphasize this enough, there's zero support from the government to get her out of this horrible situation.
But why did the Pakistani people accept this? I mean, weren't they also becoming radicalized?
Well, I think it goes back to the slow process by which these things happen. One thing I love about our U.S. history is, though there have been some seriously dark chapters, and in many ways there are some, we see a consistent trend towards improvement. If you study Supreme Court decisions in the 1800s, you find case after case where the Supreme Court said that slavery is a Christ-ordained mission and we must uphold slavery. But as we recognize that this was a ludicrous way to have a set of laws, we extracted religion, or that extremist interpretation of religion, from our laws and maintained a more secular, justice-based standard. Pakistan has slowly gone the opposite way. The first 20 to 30 years, there was a secular-based administration. Once you started defining who and who was not a Muslim, extremists gained more power, more influence, and then supported a dictator who perpetuated that and made it even worse than it is already.
The Wrong Kind of Muslim is the name of the book that we're discussing. Qasim Rashid is in the studio with me. He's an attorney and author. Gallup poll says that 78% of Pakistanis approve of death for apostates. So if anybody leaves Islam, they should be killed.
This is a frightening statistic, and this is something that I discuss at length in the book. And I liken this mentality to that of a rapist. And it sounds harsh to say at first, but it's in fact true, because a rapist is somebody who says, my needs supersede that of anyone else's, and I will do whatever I need to do to fulfill those needs. These people who believe you should kill someone for leaving a faith essentially say, my beliefs supersede your beliefs, and I will do anything I need to do to make sure that you know that. It's a very dangerous ideology, and it's unfortunately one that has ingrained itself in too many Pakistanis.
You say that, quote, an ideology that compels itself on others is a dying ideology. Is radical Islamism dying?
I think ultimately, violence begets violence and it destroys itself. One of my favorite quotes of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who is the Messiah and founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, he said this 120 years ago, that religion, which needs to make up for its weakness and argument with the sword, needs no other proof of its falsification. It cuts its own throat before reaching others. So as destructive as this radicalism actually is, it is not a sustainable model. It simply is not a sustainable model. And I think once we see the types of people that I discuss in this book who are fighting back and who are winning with compassion, with love, with education, we'll recognize that slowly but surely this tide is turning, but we need more people behind it.
Why do you think radical Muslims are so afraid of other faiths?
Well, I think it's not just radical Muslims. I think it's just radicals in general, right? I mean, radicals by definition don't think rationally and have a convoluted, myopic view of the world.
But I'm thinking especially your cousin Daniel, who was, I guess he was proselytizing Ahmadiyya Islam, and he was arrested. He was tortured. These are Pakistani police officers. Yep. These were not some mob.
Sure.
They were saying, who are you talking to? Who are the converts? What are they afraid of?
Well, in fact, Daniel was simply preaching in the mosque. He wasn't even going out and proselytizing. I don't even think they know what they're afraid of. I think it comes back to ignorance as a powerfully destructive weapon, and you combine that with arrogance, and you can guarantee destruction as well. Look, in Pakistan, Ahmadiyya Muslims are not allowed to so much as say Assalamu alaikum without being arrested. I had somebody
because they're acting like Muslims.
Because we're acting like Muslims. I had somebody once tell me that Ahmadis aren't Muslims because we don't call the azan in Pakistan. And I said, you ignorant person, do you not realize we'll be arrested for calling the azan? So this is how the worldview has completely shifted for some of these people. And it comes back to, you have an ignorant worldview, combine that with arrogance, it's a destructive combination no matter what religion you claim it follows.
Qasim Rashid is in the studio with me. He's the author of the book called The Wrong Kind of Muslim, An Untold Story of Persecution and Perseverance. Qasim, let's talk about your background. You were raised in the United States, and as a teenager, you had your faith questioned by a Christian coworker, and you went back to your dad, and you said, Dad, these are the questions. What's the answer? Yeah,
this was one of the life-changing moments of my childhood that at the time I didn't realize it, but now as I reflect, I see the chain of events that happened. Essentially, a Christian evangelical coworker tore my beliefs to shreds, and I didn't know whether I was looking up or down or left or right. And I went to my father, who's a theologian. He teaches at an Islamic seminary in Toronto now. And I thought, great, my dad can, answer these questions, bada bing, bada boom, I can knock him out and be on my way. And my father did something very peculiar. He looked at me dead in the eye, and he refused to answer any of my questions. And at the time, it didn't make sense. At the time, I was even more angry that this is ridiculous. What if I convert to Christianity? I threatened him that what if I convert to Christianity? And he calmly responded, hey, if that's where you find your peace, knock yourself out. You have your own mind. You have your own brain. Go figure it out. You're not a robot to be programmed. And that's essentially the argument that I'm making in this book, that as human beings, we're not robots. We cannot be forced to believe something, and we cannot be told what to believe. We have to learn how to think instead of what to think. And I think that's a message that people of all faiths can unite behind.
I really liked your dad's response, but I was thinking I would have probably freaked out. I mean, he stayed perfectly calm. Was that an act, or was he really like, sure, go find your own answers? No,
he was genuine about it, and I think it goes back to two things. One, there's a very important verse in the Quran that says, La ikraha fid din. There's no compulsion in matters of religion. And so for him to be a Muslim theologian and preach this, but then when it comes to his own kids, protect them and shy them away and tell them what to believe, it would be hypocritical. But I think it also goes back to one of the teachings of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, where he said that when you're searching for truth, one of the prerequisites is you must be objective in everything you do. You cannot have a preconceived notion going into it. This is something that my grandfather did when he was searching for his peace, something that my father went through, and something that I stumbled into and kind of got pushed through. It's kind of ironic to say that he forbade me from believing something simply because he believed, but he forced me to believe on my own, which is kind of an interesting concept, that he compelled me to not be compulsive.
And you become much more faithful because you believe it for yourself, not because somebody else taught you.
Well, I think in the long run, you become more certain of what your identity is. And I think one of the problems we see with some of these radicals and extremists is they don't have an identity, so they just do what they're told. When you have an identity, when you have something that you can stand up for, something you can be proud of, then you cannot be radicalized, or you're much more difficult to radicalize because you have an anchor that keeps you grounded and keeps you focused.
You were visiting India with a friend who grew up in Pakistan, and you were talking to a Hindu shopkeeper about his faith. And your friend got very anxious and told you to stop. Why?
Well, at the time, I thought he was being very paranoid. In fact, I got extremely annoyed. I remember being very annoyed at him, and I don't express this in the book as well as I should have, but I remember being very annoyed with him that we're in India, we're actually in Qadian, in the town where the promised Messiah was born. If there's any place in the world where I can express my faith freely, it should be here, theoretically. But he was panicking because he thought I was evangelizing to this Hindu shopkeep, and he thought that it could get me in trouble. Now, at the time, I thought he was being ridiculous, that somebody would actually come from Pakistan to spy on us and try to harm us or kill us. But upon returning to Pakistan and upon understanding firsthand some of the vicious tortures, police tortures, kidnappings, murders, rapes that go on every single day before our eyes with zero prosecution, once I began to see that firsthand, I began to realize it wasn't paranoia, it wasn't a phobia, right? A phobia is an irrational fear. This was very much rational. And, I guess I stepped back and thought, would I have done the same thing had I been in his shoes? And frankly, to this day, I can't answer that question. I don't know.
You say this, quote, in his mind, any discussion of religion in public was an invitation to be killed in cold blood. I shudder to think what a miserably oppressive reality it was.
Well, and that's unfortunately what tens of millions of religious minorities have to suffer through in Pakistan.
What impact does that reality have on the people of Pakistan or any country that has that kind of oppressive religious intolerance?
Well, I think you see this when you look at the people that are in their 20s and 30s in Pakistan. They've been raised in a society where might is right, where the government has defined what is, quote, the right Muslim, and if anybody is not in that cookie cutter shape, is suddenly the wrong kind of Muslim. And you begin to live under a slave mentality. You begin to consider yourself as a second-class citizen, and without realizing it, you subjugate yourself. And I think that's probably one of the biggest tragedies that I've seen people, members of my own family, who unfortunately don't have the confidence that a human being should have, simply because they're afraid of what might be knocking on their front door. And I want to make sure I don't sound condescending, because it's a legitimate fear. It's a very legitimate fear.
Because people do come knocking in the middle of the night.
Absolutely.
When you were in Pakistan, you tried to talk to some Christians. What happened?
Well, the women ran away, which I guess is a reflection of my high school life. So,
but really, I mean, they were justified. They had no idea what you were up to.
Zero idea. You heard me mention the story of Asya Bibi. Rimsha Masih is another Christian girl who was accused of blasphemy, and a mob came to try to kill her.
She was, I think, developmentally disabled as well.
Which only adds insult to injury, even more so. That a developmentally disabled child could be pursued to be killed because of an alleged blasphemy, which, by the way, it was proven to be a fabrication. So, the Christian woman ran away simply because of that fear, and the Christian man, who was very gracious, very kind, when I asked him finally point blank, what can we do to help stop the persecution? His answer was one of the most painful things I've ever seen. The look in his eye was just of complete, remorse and defeat. He just simply said nothing and walked away. And there was nothing I could do to get him to talk to me more and to change his mind.
Are things changing in Pakistan, or do they continue to get worse?
I think right now we're in a situation where there are positive signs in Pakistan. For example, for the first time in the nation's history, they had a peaceful democratic transfer of power from one democratically elected regime to another. That's definitely a plus, and I want to commend and recognize Pakistan for that. That being said, even that voting process was discriminatory because Ahmadiyya Muslims now are the only religious minority in Pakistan who don't have free and fair voting. They have to either declare themselves to be apostates or declare Mirza Ghulam Ahmad to be an apostate before they're even allowed to vote. So if it would be like Catholics having to denounce the Pope before they were allowed to vote, or Hindus having to declare that they're not real Americans before they're allowed to vote. It's just a ridiculous, barbaric ritual that the Pakistani government requires.
You had visited Pakistan in 2005, and then when you came back, you started to advocate religious tolerance, but then you got hate mail and death threats.
Well, and I think it goes back to the mentality that's been developed of might is right. This draconian understanding that you can define what someone's religion is for them. But
who was giving you death threats?
So-called Muslims were giving me death threats for advocating for religious freedom, for advocating that there is a concept of pluralism in Islam.
Why would that bother them?
The same reason why 78% of Pakistanis think that you should kill somebody for leaving Islam. You have an ignorance factor. One thing that has probably become very apparent by now is that because Ahmadiyya Muslims have their literature banned, are not allowed to hold public conferences, are not allowed to evangelize, not allowed to preach of any sort, there is immense misinformation traveling about Ahmadiyya Muslims. There are accusations that we eat pork, that we drink alcohol, that we make adultery halal or okay, that we worship our Messiah, that we do Hajj to a different place other than Makkah. These ridiculous allegations.
And that's nothing compared to what they say about Jews.
Oh, exactly. And that's the other thing. Apparently, Ahmadis are agents of Israel as well. This is another ludicrous allegation that's going about. Now, as ludicrous as these are, they become aggravated when we're not allowed to respond to them and give the proper understanding, because if we do, suddenly it's blasphemy and we're thrown in prison. So when you have this ignorance combined with this hatred that's perpetuating and nothing to mitigate it, then the result for especially the younger generation that doesn't know or hasn't had the opportunity to learn is a very visceral and aggressive response.
There have been Ahmadiyya Muslims here in the United States murdered for their faith.
Absolutely. Yep.
Do you worry about your safety?
His Holiness the Khalifa of Islam, Mirza Masroor Ahmad, visited the United States last May and gave a landmark lecture at the Montage Hotel in Hollywood. It was attended by the Lieutenant Governor of California, among several congressmen and congresswomen, about 300 faith leaders, dignitaries, professors. And he was asked the exact same question, that do you worry about your safety and security? Now, he's in exile from Pakistan, self-imposed exile. If he went back, they would try to kill him immediately. He lives in London. And his answer was very simple. He said, look, our job as a spiritual organization, as a spiritual person, is to advocate for peace, for a relationship with God, and for service to humanity. That is our mission. That is what we will continue to do as long as we have life in our bodies. Should someone try to kill us, that's their prerogative. But we trust in God, and we will continue to do whatever we need to do to serve humanity and to serve God with peace and compassion.
Qasim, what do you want people to do with the knowledge that they've gained from this book?
I want them to take action.
What?
The actions are threefold. One is to support those victims of terrorism and support those who are supporting those victims of terrorism. You heard me mention earlier that we run dozens of hospitals worldwide. We have several hospitals in Pakistan who provide free medical care to Hindus, Christians, Jews, atheists, agnostics, you name it. Support these hospitals, support these places so people who are suffering have a place to get treatment, have a place of refuge when they are being persecuted. The second thing is to educate yourself on these problems and educate your family and your friends, your circle of influence. It's one thing to watch a 30-second news clip. It's another thing to sit down with those whom you care about and say, hey, this is a serious problem. We need to be more aware of what is going on in the world. This book, I provide a very comprehensive analysis of what's going on in Pakistan, and I try to do it in an enjoyable format. But this is just one book. This is just one story. There are millions of other stories out there, millions of other research articles out there, millions of other opportunities to learn and to educate yourself. And then finally, and I think this is, in my eyes, the most important part, and this is the theme I've made in the book, is win the hearts. Don't be afraid of the other. Engage people of different faiths. Engage people who have different ideologies. Learn from them. This book doesn't just ask you to glaze over the differences that we have with one another. Christians and Muslims may never agree on the identity of Jesus Christ or with Jews, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that we discard that. It means that we recognize that and we learn to respect that. One of the things that this book has already attracted for me are several people, Jews, Christians, and atheists and Hindus, who before had a negative understanding of what Islam was. But because of this, they've written to me that now we have a bit more confidence in engaging with Muslims and recognizing that though we may have different dogmatic beliefs, we all have that same vision of a peaceful society. So those are the three things. Support those suffering, educate yourself and with those around you, and then engage with one another and try to win the heart.
Qasim, this is a self-published book. Why did you decide to go that route?
Well, I would be lying if I said I wouldn't have welcomed a piece from Random House of Simon & Schuster, but the greater context is that I had a choice of either publishing it by censoring out several of the things that I felt were fundamental to this book. And I got feedback from publishers that while the book was well written, they were too afraid, frankly, to publish it because they were fearing the Taliban backlash. If you'll notice, my editor, who did a wonderful job, asked that I not mention their name simply because of the fear of the backlash from terrorists, which is, I think, another reason why it's so crucial people read this book and recognize that this is how oppressive these terrorists are, that they're even preventing people in the United States from openly associating with the book.
Qasim Rashid, he's an attorney and author. His book is The Wrong Kind of Muslim, An Untold Story of Persecution and Perseverance. It's self-published, and the link to buy it on Amazon is on our website, mgshow.org. Qasim, thanks so much for being on the program.
Privilege is all mine. Thank you.
That's our show for this week. Email me your comments or questions to feedback@mgshow.org and join us on Facebook and Twitter. You can support this program through a variety of ways. Just visit mgshow.org and click on the link that says Support. Thanks for listening. I'm Mimi Gergis, and I'll be back again next week.